Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Black Health Podcast. Today, we are having a conversation on youth mental health, specifically from the Black perspective. Our conversation will explore how historical trauma, social stigma, and masculinity norms continue to shape mental health experiences and what it looks like to reclaim healing through culturally relevant, community-rooted approaches. My name is Mbali Shongwe. I am the program manager of Black Health, and today I'm also lucky to wear my hat as the founder of Mindful Organization, which is a youth mental health nonprofit. I am joined by Felicity Noge, who is my colleague and co-host, and I'll give her an opportunity to introduce herself.
Hey everyone, I'm Black House social media manager on the South African side. And today I'm lucky enough to be a guest on the podcast as well. So I'm excited for today's conversation.
Today we have very inspiring guests on the podcast who are both making waves in the wellness space for different reasons. I'm joined by Habyane. KG is a media professional, mental health advocate, and trained ontological coach who uses storytelling to spark powerful, reflective conversations among men. As the founder of Manned Up Conversations, he creates safe, engaging spaces for men to explore their inner lives, build meaningful relationships, and foster stronger community ties. With a background in media and digital learning design, KG has worked across a range of sectors, including corporate leadership development, NGOs, and faith-based organizations. He is the initiator of SADAG's first virtual men's mental health support group and facilitates youth advocacy and peer mentorship initiatives in Gauteng. Passionate about narrative and creative coaching, he supports individuals and groups in developing self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and personal growth. KG has recently joined the Liminal Leadership Coaching Team supporting the Takano Health Equity Fellowship. KG, thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate you, and shout out to Black Health for inviting us and making us part of a much needed conversation.
Of course. Tiffany Lekuku is the founder and CEO of Nuru House, a holistic well-being brand dedicated to fostering healing and self-discovery. A passionate advocate for holistic well-being, Tiffany has created a vibrant community hub with the recently opened Nuru Studio, a third space for mental wellness and connection. Through Nuru House, she curates transformative experiences like sound baths, Nuru Moon retreats, and meaningful collaborations with like-minded brands and individuals, all designed to help individuals rediscover well-being. As an enthusiastic facilitator, energy worker, and entrepreneur, Tiffany teaches with love, kindness, and open-mindedness, driven by her calling to bring healing to Africans and the continent of Africa through diverse modalities and platforms. We are also very happy to be hosted in Tiffany's Nuru Studio today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited for the conversations.
So we always like to start with an icebreaker just to get a sense of who you are and how you're feeling today. So I think this conversation is focused around positive and healthy mental health practices, but I think that we all have some of our self-indulgent guilty pleasures that we tend to go to when we're feeling a bit overwhelmed or stressed. So today's icebreaker question is, what is your go-to guilty pleasure when it comes to self-care? We'll start with you, Tiffany.
So my guilty pleasure is literally doing nothing and just binge watching on Netflix series, not worrying about all the influx of emails and like things going on. I also just love taking walks, spending time with like family, loved ones. So that's my guilty pleasure. Really just, I think, switching off without that sense of guilt. Because when you have a business, running a business, I think your mind is constantly ongoing. So even though it may seem like a necessity, it feels like a luxury and a little guilty pleasure for me. Yeah.
Definitely. I think we underestimate how much stillness is needed.
Yeah, absolutely.
KG, what about you?
I had such a interesting time trying to figure out what is my guilty pleasure, but I think music. I'm a closet poet, if I may call myself that. So I like to escape into that. I think music reaches a special side of us, a very primal side of us. So discovering new music, stuff that I wouldn't necessarily listen to. I love hip hop. There's a lot of words and expression in that. But when you go into like instruments and that, then there's another layer of music that you meet there. But I also like going into rabbit holes. So research, researching the most random, outlandish things just to know fascinating things about the world, about myself, maybe about other cultures as well. I think that removes me from focusing too much on myself and learning more about the world outside there. And that helps me a lot. Yeah.
I think your guilty pleasures are quite productive. So good on you for that. Felicity?
Yeah, I was going to say I'm feeling bad because my guilty pleasures actually makes me feel guilty sometimes.
Actually, yeah.
But my guilty pleasure, I think since I was a kid, I've like always found such a haven in like the computer. And when I came back from school, I always used to race to the computer. That's the first thing that I would do. So like now that I'm an adult, my guilty pleasure is definitely like gaming, video gaming. I love it. If it's Call of Duty, like a Fortnite, like I'm such a nerd. And I definitely feel guilty if I'm, beating your younger siblings there online. So that's my guilty pleasure.
Yeah, I think mine is also on the guiltier side. Like, I think I'm a rot and do nothing type of person, but I'm really self-indulgent with it. So close the blinds, give me privacy, and Netflix binge and order some takeout. And I think for me, sometimes going, like you said, into a quiet space is necessary, and into a space where you don't have to think so much. I think when you're on go all the time, it's really necessary to just take like a few moments where you're not thinking about anything. You can kind of switch off. And for me, I feel like when I'm in my room and by myself, like that's the only other time. Like relaxing at home in a Black household is not very peaceful. So you have to really set like the scene that, this is what I'm doing today.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, guys. We like to begin our podcast by just setting the scene and, doing a bit of a level setting activity, just because we know that we have audiences both here in South Africa, but also in the US. And I think when it comes to mental health, especially for young people, some experiences are universal. But the way we talk about, respond to, and access mental health support is shaped by where we come from. And in both South Africa and the US, that history is very heavy. For Black communities in both countries, stigma remains one of the biggest barriers. It's rooted in long-standing beliefs that denied us the right to struggle emotionally. In the US, during slavery, Black people were seen as incapable of experiencing mental illness. In South Africa, under apartheid, trauma was silenced, seen as weakness, or dismissed entirely. That legacy still lives on today. South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in the world, as racial disparities exist in housing, healthcare access, and socioeconomic status, all of which can contribute to an increased risk of poor mental health. Studies have found that exposure to multiple traumatic events, including racial political violence, is linked to increased mental distress. These studies have found racial inequalities in psychological distress, with Black, colored, and Indian people all reporting greater psychological distress than white people. These differences are particularly explained by social stresses, including stressful life events and unfair treatment. Just to give a bit of context on what stressful life events are, also referred to as SLEs in the mental health context, a stressful life event are major challenges or changes like job issues, money troubles, relationship conflicts, or health concerns that can take a real toll on our mental health and physical well-being. They're not just tough in that current moment. They can increase the risk of anxiety, depression, and even long-term health problems like heart disease and diabetes. For Black communities, quality care is often inaccessible, especially care that understands the realities of being young, Black, and navigating complex systems. Mental health was and still is framed as a white or middle-class issue. But today we're here to challenge that, to rewrite the script and to speak honestly about what healing looks like for Black youth in South Africa.
I think just to get to the facts and the numbers, in South Africa, 1 in 3 South Africans will or potentially have a mental illness at some point in their lifetime. The youth is also a particularly vulnerable group, with studies showing that 73% of youth need mental health support, whilst only 38% actively seek help. 75% of South Africans living with common mental health conditions also do not receive treatment. So yeah, this one's for you, Tiffany, but given the scope of the problem, which mental health challenges do you think affect South African youth the most? And why do you think that it's so difficult for us to speak about it?
So for me, I think, when I was reflecting on this question earlier, I really do believe that the socioeconomic issue is such then like a massive one in terms of stresses for the youth. I think we definitely don't undermine it or downplay it, but I really do feel like it has such a major impact on mental health. It puts a lot of strain and puts a lot of like stresses on just daily living when you are trying to get to school, trying to, get through work. Some of the jobs that a lot of the youth are employed at, you are looking at intern level salaries. And what can you do with that? A lot of the Black child also has, what we call Black tax, where you have to support family members and all of that stuff. And I think that really does take a massive toll on the mental health of the youth. And I think that really is for me one of the biggest things that I feel that the youth is struggling with. I think when you are struggling to meet your day-to-day needs, just on a basic human level, how else are you motivated to keep pushing on? How else are you motivated to get through the day and even just think and hope for the future? I think that really does affect mental health in such a massive way. And yeah, I think that's one of the big things that I identify just on a day to day as a massive impact level for the youth's mental health. Yeah.
And then just for the second part of the question, what do you think makes it so difficult to speak about it or open up to people about it?
I think we are moving in a time where it is becoming easier to speak on it. I think it's just, with platforms like Mindful, Black Health, Nuru, KG's work as well. I think there are a lot more organizations and individuals that are creating spaces for people to reach out. I think the stigmas still are lingering, especially in different parts of communities where, you have to toughen up and, you just have to keep going. And I think those stigmas and the lack of education and understanding also that mental health issue is an actual, sometimes it's a chemical imbalance in people, families don't understand that and can fully support that. So when you're also coming from households where a lot of I like I've seen jokes on Twitter, for example, where they're like, "Oh, a lot of the family members are undiagnosed, and they're walking around undiagnosed. So how else would they know that they have these issues? Yet you've inherited them and you're able to identify them for yourself." So I think those stigmas around families, communities, upbringings, not even knowing and being able to identify and label as something that is actually quite critical and impactful in how you show up. For example, your ADHDs, your schizophrenia, so many people walking around undiagnosed. And I think that educational piece of it is quite important, but I think it makes it difficult because you feel isolated in certain communities to be like, is this even real thing? Or is it just because I haven't made rent? Or is it just because it's student life? So I think those barriers that are quite, yeah, that there's multiple layers to it. I think that make it quite difficult for a lot of people to get to that point of seeking help. But yeah, I think we're trying to do our best, many organizations, in kind of just saying, hey, there are many different platforms and spaces where if a Nuru isn't what you're seeking, there is the mindful organization, there is a KG, and how do we approach that fits into you? And I think that's quite powerful um, in the work that we are doing, I believe.
No, 100%. I think that we know that the reality is that stigma and financial means are one of the biggest barriers that people face. And especially for young people, I think that when you're trying to set up your life, there's so many things that you're focused on. You're focused on a roof over your head, what you're eating, your workspace, or you're studying. There's so many boxes to tick. And then mental health feels like a luxury. And it feels like this thing that you don't need to focus on it right now, or it's not a necessity, or maybe it's something that you can handle yourself. And I think it's a lot around how people speak about mental health and the language that's used. And we know that that is compounded and always worse when it comes to the men in our society. I think that the way we are as a society expects this like impossible standard of men where they're not allowed to feel they're not allowed to express when things are hard, and also because their financial means are often delegated to so many other responsibilities, using it for something like mental health support or seeking help might not be deemed the most useful use of your money, or that you're doing the right thing. KG, you do a lot of work specifically when it comes to Black men. Why do you think that it's still so hard for Black men to open up about their mental health? And what role does community perception play in shaping how men feel when it comes to seeking support?
Well, that's a very important question. I think one of the bigger issues is dealing with fatherlessness in the country, right? So when we look at it from that perspective, we know that a lot of men don't have an identity, a center to go back to, right? Me as Kgaugelo, I don't know my father, for example. I met him very late in my life. So there's a grounding that I didn't receive, or a foundational teaching that I didn't receive. So that in itself says that there's something missing for me already. To define myself as a man, I have to look outside myself, right? Because I don't have that sort of inner identity, right? That place that I can go to say, I'm Kgaugelo Habyane, this is where I'm from, this is my lineage, this is what my grandmother is, this is what my grandfather is from my mother's side and from my father's side. Then we have a more well-rounded identity, right? And a way to speak of self, right? And if you don't have that, then how do you even navigate anything? How do you even talk about challenges? How do I even speak of myself? How do I even think of raising a family or functioning in society, or what is my role as a man? Firstly, for me, right? And then again, when you look at it in society, we're looking at men who look like they are men, who look like they are doing well, who look like they're together. But often when you speak to those men, like we were saying earlier, you never really know much about them. You know about what they do, what they're capable of doing, but not them, right? So it's that identity piece. So if I think of the identity crisis that we face as men, that's very much a mental health issue, right? Because then, how, what am I? Do I even know what depression is manifesting like in my life? Do I know what the history of depression is in my family? Then we're talking about apartheid, for example. We never had that was a perfect opportunity for us to speak about healing when we were doing the TRC, right? But we didn't heal men. What we did then instead is we put a little plaster over it, and we set up things and programs and said, and it's a very sensitive one to say right now, we're empowering women in South Africa. We have 30 years of democracy for women empowerment, but nothing about healing men who are on the front lines fighting. And of course, there were women who are fighting too, who are helping these men who were returning from the battlefield, right? How did we help them, right? How did they, how were their relationships supported? How did they talk about the experiences during apartheid? What about the father? What did he experience on his way to work, on his way back from work? How he's being treated at work? So all of those things form a very interesting dynamic in our minds, right? And then I'm born of a father who lived a life like that. Then that predisposes me to also overperform, not see myself as a human being, because then if I don't perform to the levels that my father did during apartheid, then I'm a weak man, right? If he could do that during those times when he's being called Sien and he's being abused, he's being verbally abused, physically abused, and I come here, I'm Kgaugelo, I've got a car, I can drive here to stand here and have a conversation with ladies about mental health, man, then, then I have some kind of identity. But if things go wrong for me, then I'm going to be like, but my dad, went through apartheid and he pushed through everything. Then why can't I do it? Then I wouldn't reach out for help. I don't know what my dad did to reach out for help. So those conversations are missing between us and our fathers, our mothers even, right? Or our uncles. So then I look at it from that perspective. And then our communities as well see our fathers or uncles as drunk people who've checked out of community. But we're forgetting that there's an element or there's a part of them that was never spoken to, that was never addressed, that was never highlighted in our community. Instead, men went from fighting in the front lines and then immediately went to work, became BEs and became successful, right? And that became the driving force for men now. The men that we see on our social media, the men that we highlight in society as the positive role models, these are the men who look like they've made it, but we don't know very much about their inner world, their inner lives. What are their struggles? How did they navigate those challenges? So I think society then wants to put up this brave face of Black men who've made it, but then we're very afraid to talk about the sensitivities of Black men, because then that brings about a very different conversation, a very different way to look at men's ways of being, right? Because then I'm not just seeing my father as someone who soldiered through apartheid and he's this, Superman, right? But I see him as someone who experienced depression, who experienced the fear of not knowing if I'm gonna make it home tonight, the fear of not knowing, am I even gonna be able to be there for my son and see him grow up, or for my family, for my wife. So there's a lot that apartheid did to us. And even speaking on apartheid, we only speak to apartheid. We don't speak before apartheid, because we had communities before that, right? What did those communities look like? So then my I guess my point here is that when we talk of Black men in South Africa, we need to expand the story a little bit more, and which is why I do storytelling as opposed to just putting up facts of 1 in 3 have mental health issues. I think the whole country has a mental health issue, to be honest. I think we're all traumatized. We all went through very similar experiences. Whether we talk to it or not, that's a different conversation. Yeah. So communities see men, they want to help men. But like Tiffany said a bit earlier, women don't know how to start that conversation. I told you guys, I have a bunch of friends who, I have these conversations all the time, but it's very hard for me to even get them to talk about some of these things, right? So how do we then get through the man himself if the community can't get through, So I think there's a layer of us opening up and being honest with ourselves, number one, accepting ourselves for all of our failures, flaws, successes, strengths, weaknesses, all of that. And once we accept that, I think then we'll start seeing ourselves as men, as human beings, not just Black men, but human beings, right? And then that as a human being, you go through everything that every other human being goes through. Unfortunately, apartheid has removed that from us, right? That we have to overperform to be these men. And it's unfortunate. Yeah.
Now, yeah, you've painted a very beautiful picture, or like a real picture of what the history and what the history is and how it informs our current reality. And I think when we look at Black men, there's a huge case of suppression, and we always know that like a trauma suppressed is going to come in and act up in one way or another, and you can't really keep something that was that traumatic and that impactful on you as a human being. You can't keep that down. And so spaces for conversation and for unpacking these traumas really need to be made for men. We know that in your work you try to address this. So how does your work specifically speak to these barriers, and what are your solutions in terms of creating more spaces for mental health men to address their mental health?
So in my space, I approach men with just a conversation. I don't attack them. I'm not trying to get you to expose yourself. I think it's one of the first things. It's just to honor and meet you where you're at, as we say. And if where you're at is fighting and complaining about how your woman is treating you, then that's where you are, right? That's where we start the conversation. But then we can then unpeel layers as we speak. I then share what I've experienced, what I'm going through, the difficulties that I'm experiencing in my life. And I think by doing that, that allows the other man to see that I don't have to perform with KG. KG is just another brother of mine, and he's sharing his truth with me, right? This past weekend, I was part of a circle where we under a tree in Soweto, with a bunch of men I don't know, right? I know Baba Buntu, who I've been speaking to for about 2 years. And I get there, these men receive me, I had to say my name, where I'm from, what my family lineage is, and then I get into the space. That made me feel very welcome, right? Then I'm seen, I'm heard. So then that aspect is what I also try to bring into my work, is be kind and compassionate to that man, not to judge him, because a lot of us want to automatically, no, you did what to your wife, then that already puts that man in defense, because, oh man, maybe I shouldn't have brought that up, right? But then if I then just inquire a little bit more, man, how did that make you feel? Why did you do, what were you trying to take care of, right? Because then we might think this man is just being bullish, but there's something there that he's wanting to take care of, and it might not make sense to me or you or anyone in the world, but to them, that's a very important thing. And that's the thing that men don't often get to speak of. Our needs are very rarely met because we are always doing for others. We are always providing. Even the finances that we get, the monies that we get, it's not for us, right? Even if I'm buying myself an M3 tomorrow, that's not for me. Chances are I'm buying it so I can look the part, right? I can get into certain spaces and get accepted by certain people. So then I try to bring an element of authenticity. Let's take away all of that. I'm not here to talk about your cars. I know your career means a lot to you, and that's okay, because that we need that as men, right? But then what is going on inside your world, man? What is going on with your child? What is going on with you? You know, when was the last time you checked in with how you're doing emotionally? When was the last time you checked on how you're using your language? Are you using your language to create more opportunity for you, ways to see your situations differently? Or are you using it to close down those opportunities, right? To expand your thinking around things? How are you showing up body-wise in spaces? Am I coming in as I'm KG, I'm very important, you guys know nothing, I'm the expert here? Or am I coming in, you know, being very open and embracing of people's differences? And I think the more we get to do that, hearing other men's stories, hearing how other men, not only how they made money, but how they lost money and had to struggle to get that money back, how they lost themselves and had to work back to rebuild the confidence, to rebuild being me, feeling like I'm me today, you know, whether I'm dressed in 5 rand sneakers or I'm in shorts or whatever, right? But as long as I have that sense of self in whatever situation that I'm in, I'm able to respond to the changes that are happening in my life, in society that I live in. Then I think once we get to that place of conversation with men, we move away from you have to be an exceptional performer. You have to be this exceptional human being to be a man, because I believe that we kind of working through what do we call it, wanting to legitimize ourselves, wanting to be seen and successful, and that comes at a very high price. You know, we don't think of patriarchy as something very detrimental to us, or the privilege that we have is very detrimental. Because as much as you see someone, you know, being very privileged, you don't know that that man probably doesn't sleep, he doesn't see his kids, he hasn't made love to his wife in over a year, or whatever the situation is, right? But they don't talk about those things. And the next time we see that man either taking his life or beating his wife, and we thinking he's just an abuser, but he's been living through things that he hasn't spoken about. And that's what I try to do with the platform, is share these stories so that whoever is listening on the other side, you can sit with it by yourself. You know, it's not something that you can necessarily take and share with your friends immediately because of the sensitivity of these conversations. But you'll sit with it by yourself, and then when you're ready in your own time, then you can share it, you know, or you can reach out to me and I could help. We have a bunch of other men that come on the platform who are psychologists, doctors, music therapists, and I reach out to people who are not doing very conventional talk therapy, right? Because I believe that in music therapy, for example, I mean, we're African people, drumming, all of that, that speaks to a very deep part of us, right? But then again, there's also the invitation. Are you ready to come into that space? Are you willing to push yourself out there? We had a grief workshop where we're doing it with drums and music and that, you know. And a bunch of guys wanted to come through, but only one guy showed up. And we said, okay, cool. And we'll do it with you, right? And it happened to be one of the best experiences. So whether it's 5, whether it's 2, whether it's 10, for me, it's a matter of just forming the space. And when other men are ready to show up to their space, they will. You know, all you have to do, if you are part of that space or part of the conversation, is share it with one more man. And that's how we grow the conversation. I don't believe in this thing of, you know, men have to talk, men have to go to therapy. I don't know where you are in your journey, so I don't want to force things on you, but then I'll invite you gently, you know, to then, when you are ready, take the step.
Incredible. I'm so grateful to you and the work that you're doing. I think even ahead of this conversation, as a team, we were speaking about, you know, we really want to center men in the conversation and create a space for men's platforms to be exposed and just to understand a bit more about it. But the search was difficult. We searched for long and long and long until we found you. So you are really speaking to a crisis that is so needed. Like the intervention is like very few and far between. And so you're doing incredible work. Thank you so much for your platform. And we hope that after this conversation, a lot of men who are listening to this do engage, because I specifically like, quite similarly to Tiffany, that you use alternative methods and kind of display this notion that there's no one size fits all, and it's okay to be met wherever you are specifically, and to engage to maybe the full extent or even a half extent based on what you're feeling and what your capacity is. And I think that that's the mental health journey, that it's an ebb and flow. You feel differently at different times, and it's nice that you create a wide range of resources that cater to that need. I think something that we know when it comes to the mental health conversation, whether it's male perception and what society has constructed about around male mental health, or if it's just mental health as a notion in itself, social media cannot be ignored. And in an era such as this, I think a lot of what we believe about the world we get from social media. And Felicity, you work in the social media space and you have a very specific understanding of how that stuff works. How do you think that harmful narratives around mental health and masculinity are popularized, and how do we shift the digital language and norms when it comes to male mental health?
I think it's a bit of a, when I was reflecting on this question, I was just thinking again that there is kind of a bit of there's a general approach or a general narrative that's around, and then there is kind of what's really specific and what affects men. And I think that from a general perspective, something that's been, I think, a trend for me for a while, or something that I've noticed for a really long while, is I think as people are starting to learn more like culturally relevant mental health language, like, things like the word trigger, or even all the terms that we have for the stresses that we experience. I think that social media has been beneficial enough to give us words for things that we didn't know what they meant before. So I think definitely grateful for that. But I think that maybe it's because we have to put out shorter content on social media, so you don't have so much time to explain your way through things. But I think that the language specifically starts to become, we hear a lot of people use like words like anxiety and depression. I just think with that though, it becomes harder and harder to differentiate between someone who is experiencing anxiety versus someone who's diagnosed with anxiety. And I don't think, again, it's putting blame on anyone. We all have a 15-second timer going off. So, I think people should also, take what you say with a pinch of salt. But I was just also thinking again that if you identify with having anxiety on your platform, there might be another person who is then using that to self-diagnose. So kind of using a tick box method to be like, okay, I'm also like that, I'm also like this, I'm also like that. But imagine what it does for your brain, even at a subconscious level, to live as someone who's diagnosed with a chronic illness when you haven't actually been diagnosed with that. Whether you might stand to be or not is, really neither here nor there. But I think that kind of like living into something that you might not understand fully, this might just be what it is, I think can really, really put you in like just, some treacherous waters. You wouldn't put on a cast if you didn't have a broken leg. You wouldn't go to chemo if you didn't have cancer. So it's like you need to be very, very certain before you take on all of these like self-help methods for something that hasn't been diagnosed. But again, another thing that we've kind of been speaking about is the access to healthcare. So I think people are also doing it from kind of a place of like, well, maybe they don't have some extra cash to go to therapy. So this is kind of what's working for them now, So again, it's not really a judgment thing, but more of an eye-opening thing where I think you as a user of social media need to be conscious of, separating the one from the other. And then again, from the male perspective specifically, or what I'm just seeing coming more to the forefront of my social media pages is like, obviously, again, like the increase in red pill content as the world starts to get way more conservative than, it's been in a while. I think that conservatism, or rather, that thought hasn't really even ever been on the side of males' mental health anyway. It's also that same thing where it's like, be strong, whatever, don't talk about your feelings, like provide. So, I think I saw a TikTok a while ago that was about this guy who was like, he has 3 days in one day because he like sleeps for 2 hours and then wakes up.
It's the same thing. And he's like, I'm manipulating time or whatever. That's the funniest thing.
Exactly. And I mean, any like mental health practitioner will tell you that as soon as you start sacrificing sleep, like that's one of the scariest things you can do for yourself. So I think that those narratives are really harmful to men. And then to go to your point earlier, KG, where you were saying that we're 30 years of like women's empowerment, but we're also living with all of the men that are not healed. I think that now we're also seeing an increase of like men using their platforms when they're not healed, and for me, it might be a different perspective where like I see these like men, this is a generalization. It is a generalization. It is. Men getting on podcasts and talking about women, or not even really discussing why they maybe feel these negative feelings about women. Like, let's unpack that, but rather just like very antagonistic kind of behavior. And again, that was a reason why I was so excited to have you on the podcast, because in your personal capacity, you speak to those issues and to the growth of it, without without anyone else telling you to. But I feel like there's another side of it where it's like people are using their platforms to say some really, really, really damaging things. And I think that one thing we learned like early from like racism workshops and all that kind of stuff at school is like sometimes you need to understand the influence that your platform has. So you might have like an idea, and maybe it's good to discuss, with your friends, with the people that are around you. Maybe it's good to get that out and go back and forth. But sometimes that's not the thing that needs a microphone. That's maybe an inside kind of a conversation. When like 16-year-olds are watching your thing and you're saying really harming things about women, they also don't have the understanding to separate that from reality, which I think is very scary. And then again from the I think we're also seeing a rise of like just lifestyle content coming up for men, where also it sets the bar so high. Like, these guys are filming videos with drones and Ferraris and supermodels, and now you're like 16 or you're 21 and you're like, oh, how am I going to get the drone? How am I going to get the Ferrari? How am I going to get the supermodel? So I think that in that way it can be very damaging to men. So yeah.
The manosphere. I think that's what you are up against, KG.
Oh man, I'm such a fan of the manosphere, and why I say that is because manosphere brings out a very raw side of men, right? And if you go in there not prepared, you'll get very shocked by everything that's in there. But in reality, that's what guys say. So what I appreciate about it is that, okay, well, we're bringing these conversations to the public, right? But as you said, a lot of the men are not healed, right? A lot of the men are not in a position to be giving advice to the youth, especially. So that's where the problem comes in. So for me, when I look at the manosphere, I tend to, okay, I agree with some of it, but I want to ask questions, because that's where we then get to understand, well, where is all of this thinking coming from? Is this coming from a place of hurt? Is this coming from a place of trying to get some vengeance against someone who, did something? Is it coming from a place of, I'm really concerned and I actually want to understand how these things work, right? So there is that element of red pill manosphere conversation, right? But then at the same time, there's the dangerous part of it, which is it's very much appealing because they use stuff like the cars, which is very attractive to the youth. They use the women, they use the money, right? Your Andrew Tate, you can think of. One of the guys was telling me about, what's his name? Shebe or someone. I don't know his name properly. But they're saying like his content is very dangerous, right? Because then kids in Limpopo, for example, are growing up, dressed like this guy in a ski mask, cap, pants down. Even the walk is like him, and the stuff they're doing. So now it's gone beyond just manosphere. Now it's in the music, right? It's in influencers. So someone won't look at KG and say, man, I want to be like that guy. Because I'm not coming on there with flashy stuff. I'm just me, right? And I'm sharing from my own heart, right? But when you see me and then I'm in conversation with you and we talk, then there's a whole different conversation. Whereas the men that you see on social media, if you meet them and you actually want to talk to them, you'll see there's very little substance there. And I've met some of the guys that I look up to on social media and like, oh, okay, wow, Or some people that I see in community, I'm like, man, I think that growth man or that timer is someone that I can grow up with, I can learn from, only to find out there isn't much to offer there. He's not healed himself, right? I might have to play a fatherly role to that older man, right? Some of the youth are also finding out that, man, our fathers are not the men that we thought they were because, oh, shoot, I'm growing up now and I can see things, right? So there's that element that I think social media likes to play on young men's minds and desires, right? If I come across with a suit, I think I've actually said this to someone, or if I did my podcast in a suit and I put, fancy whiskey and all of that, I'd probably have more followers just because of the aesthetic and the look, right? But then if I'm just me like this, they'll probably not, So we are fighting against a very big machine. We're also fighting against people who have the finances to be able to do that, to put up drones and all of that, right? But then content is what matters. And that's why I said in the beginning is if you are centered within yourself, you'll know I can engage with this, I can listen to it, but it's not going to do much to me. And that's why for me, I think we need to find the balance of not demonizing the manosphere as much, but using it as a way to actually find out, well, what's going on in that world of men, right? As damaged as it sounds, as broken as it sounds, there's a lot of hurt in there. And as practitioners, as people who are working in the space, psychologists and all of that, I think it would do us a lot of justice to go into that space and start to pull out stuff to help, to create, interventions that are very appropriate for men. Because then there's also that idea that therapy is very feminized, We were saying earlier, how do you get more men into your spaces? I mean, I would argue that if men came in here and they sat down at the sound baths and that, they would have a wonderful experience. But then again, it also goes with curiosity, right? Am I curious enough to put myself out there? And maybe I'm afraid of what might come out. And that's another issue, right? Because man, it's hard, man. I've done therapy, I've done counseling, and I'll call it coaching more than counseling or therapy. And I've had to speak to things that I've kept this thing so hidden for a very long time. And suddenly here's this woman asking me all these questions and like, oh man, okay, now I said it. Now I'm crying, But then later on, I feel good. And I'm with my friends and I can tell them that, hey man, I've been doing therapy or I've been going to coaching and that. And those conversations then start to shift perspective. We don't rely so much on social media, right? On people I don't know. Then I can speak to people I actually see in my community, right? Because I don't know what this guy in the States or this guy in Kenya, because Kenya is also big on the manosphere thing. I don't know what those people are like on their day-to-day. So why must I cling on to their messaging? Why can't I speak to someone that I can actually see, right? That I can actually learn from? So that's where I also have a bit of challenge with social media. You see, I also don't post a lot of messagey stuff around, take care of your mental health. I'll share a story so you can listen to what a man says and you can learn what you learn from that. Yeah.
I actually just want to add, if you don't mind, to what you just said like a bit earlier. And it ties back to the thing around the stigma and why maybe people struggle to reach out to, like take that step line over. And you mentioned like how, you're scared to open up. And I think that is the curiosity for a lot of people, I think in the space and the work that I've been doing the past couple of years now. The curiosity is there, but when people, I think where the follow through and the hesitation and the fear comes for people following through with their mental health journeys or the well-being is, okay, now you have me open. Now you have me vulnerable. What now must I do? Do I just go home and cry? Do I now have this existential crisis? And I think that's actually such a big thing where people are like, okay, you've had me, you have my attention. What do I do now afterwards? What is the toolkits? What are the things that are practical? And again, speaking to the social economic stresses and financial things, it's like, okay, so now do I have to come back and it's thousands or hundreds that I don't have? Is this sustainable? And then I think that's where people pull away or fall away and be like, you know what, I just have to keep pushing. There's no time for me to pay attention to my mental health right now. So I just wanted to add to that point of like actually that loop and completing that cycle. I think for a lot of people, that hesitation and that fear is like, now that you have my attention and I've had the conversation with you, okay, so now what, KJ? Are we coming back, sitting under a tree every Sunday, or what is it? Because I think once you have people so open, there's a dependency or this vulnerability to, like, what does it, incubate almost or cocoon to make sure that people are integrating and making sense of the work that they're doing. And obviously, we are not clinical therapists and psychologists. We are really just trying to offer alternative ways, affordable ways that can assist in mental health awareness. And I think in every single one of our different practices, we do try with the information that we give to close that loop and provide practical things that you can do at home by yourself, or returning sessions, things that are accessible and affordable. So I just wanted to tie that in because I was just thinking about it and I was like, oh, that's actually a big thing where I think people hesitate in following through or coming back into sessions or workshops or, the other things.
And as much as that's
Sorry, I just wanted to add there that I think that the idea of therapy is not the therapist doing the work for you. And that's something that I think often gets confused with therapy is you're gonna have to do a lot of work, and that's something you must be prepared for. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that the psychologist or the therapist has all the things for you to do. There will be quite a lot that you have to unearth yourself.
100%. Yeah, Tiffany, I kind of wanted to ask you again. Obviously, we have the situation where you already feel vulnerable. Maybe you've gone to the therapy and now you kind of feel, like you said, a bit exposed, or a bit raw, and feels a bit raw and a bit real. But I wanted to ask, when you don't process the emotional experiences that you have, how do you find in your work that it comes out that the body is actually storing this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think the body keeps score. And I always love saying that. I mean, I haven't read the book, but just the title on its own for me registers so much because I felt that in just my own personal capacity. What isn't dealt with really does manifest on a physical level. And I think, you end up feeling and seeing the physical symptoms of, for example, something simple like a flu, your immune system really weakening, the anxiety, diagnosed or not diagnosed. Also some things are situational, the stresses that come up in the body, you becoming more snappy around loved ones where, typically if your nervous system is more regulated, you feel you can manage and, can navigate situations differently. So I think the way things manifest physically and outward, I think it really is where you see yourself being more out of character than usual. And I think that also comes with a certain level of awareness of just being like, hey, I'm usually like this. And fair granted, we're not all perfect. Sometimes you won't even notice that you're more snappier. Someone else, a loved one, can be like, hey, are you good? Or maybe you have an argument with someone and you're like, oh, that's typically not me. I think having that self-awareness, and even in that, I don't want to say self-awareness is something that is now such a scary thing for people to like deep dive in, but it's just paying attention. Pay attention to yourself. Be mindful of yourself. And it's just in simple ways of, on a day to day, are you high or low? How often are you high or low in a day, in a week? And yeah, you're able to then notice when the stress and all that anxiety or every other thing that you're experiencing manifests physically. And I think when you follow those signs in your body as they are physically manifesting, it really is a reminder to slow down, take a deep breath. All of that is free. The sunlight is free. Taking a walk, even just around the house or wherever, around the block is there for you just to kind of ground and recenter. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
100% does. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one thing that we've noticed in your work as a whole is that you celebrate diversity in terms of the modalities that you offer, the introduction of an African lens into your work. When we speak about culturally specific or context specific healing, what does it feel or what does it mean to heal in a way that feels rooted in who we are as Africans, as young people? What does that mean to you?
So with my business and the brand, I mean, our motto is rediscover well-being. And even just with that, it is really remembering that we are not reinventing the wheel. That rediscover is a going back to the essence, going back to the core. It's really remembering just simple practices that, our ancestors, our forefathers used in simple times. You mentioned in the apartheid context and even before that, that we had communities. I always watch Shaka Ilembe. I don't even know why I'm obsessed. But I really always just watch that, and I'm just like, there was such a simple way of living and existing, and our ancestors knew that. They relied on the moon. They relied on, how to be able to tell what time of day it is. Those simple practices we really take for granted now when we're bombarded in an age of AI and technology. And I think that disconnect, I also do truly believe, affects our mental health in a massive way. So even just with the work that we do, it's rediscover well-being, rediscover the basics. Let's just take a step back and let's look at, sound baths that I do. We just, I facilitate the sessions with crystal balls, and it's really paying attention to the frequency. What does that do for the body? Sound is constantly around us, but the intention around that, the different modalities that I bring in with breathwork instructors, it's really going back to, we're focusing on our breath. We're focusing on the things that have already existed. We are not reimagining and recreating this thing. And for us as an African context, we are so powerful. We are so magical, and I think so much that we've gone through has really tried to make us forget that we are really ethereal beings, I truly believe. And going back to those practices and the things that we have at our disposal from, decades, centuries ago, is so easy for us to tap into. So looking at your different lineages as well, one thing that I always encourage with my clients and all the different sessions, I'm always like, hey, you should look back in what your lineage looks like as far back as you can. Not everyone is privileged to be able to be like, oh, great 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 grandfather, but there's a certain pattern, there's a certain way in which your family exists, or even outside of the traumas, look at the strengths as well. What is it that you can pick up in there that you find has been such an anchor within your family, whether it's church, whether it's paslaring, whether it's this, that is your anchor, that is your source. And everyone's well-being journey is completely different and unique. And what I try encourage is that, hey, even though we are in community, you're still on your individual journey. And I do not want to impose any belief on you, but I just want to remind you of your power. I want to remind you of the power of your lineage and where you come from. And if sitting in a session with any one of our practitioners ignites that remembering for you, I feel like we've done our job. So it's really just that moment of connection and remembering that I find ignites so much, and a lot of the people that come through into our space and the work that I do. It's such a big driving force for me.
Wow. I think that one of the big parts of resistance when it comes to therapy or mental health intervention is that it's been positioned to us as Black people from a Western lens. And it's been sold to us and packaged in a way that doesn't feel authentic in terms of who we are and what we've known from our families, from our ancestry. So for you to bring that back and to I like that you said that you're reminding of something that already exists. It's not something that you're recreating or something new. It's just a remembrance of what is already there within you, within your family, within your culture. I think it's so important for us, especially as young people, like Black youth, to have that connection. I mean, a lot of us in this space, even I can speak from my own perspective, is like I don't have that understanding of what does my ancestry look like, what were the different modes of healing in my family, what were the different plagues or struggles in my family. And I think that there is this desire of this new generation of Black people and Black young people to connect with who they were before the world sold them a different picture. And I think that that also will inform our healing in such a meaningful way. And I love that you've done that. That's a really beautiful homage to who we are. And like you said, remembering our strength, because the world is so determined to take that away from Black people. So incredible mind and incredible journey that you're on, Tiffany. I think that what we've also seen, and KG, you spoke about it earlier, is that storytelling and healing, a lot of it is happening currently online. And like Felicity was saying, it's a give and take, and like it has its pros and cons, where we're very grateful that there is a space where maybe somebody who is isolated or doesn't have a friend or community is able to share their healing journey online. That can have its benefits, but there's also elements that are lost online. And when it comes to healing, I'm going to pose this both to you, KG, and Felicity. When it comes to healing online and sharing stories online, what elements do you think are lost in the healing journey when people are going to online resources as opposed to community spaces to heal?
I think for me, just to speak on kind of like the storytelling level of sharing, with like specific reference to things like, like venting videos or like, that kind of style of storytelling where it's more, I guess, the situation is heightened and then the person comes to the platform as a means to vent. When I was doing some research, one thing that I learned was in all the mental health content that we consume, when they were kind of testing to see the sources that it comes from, individuals account for like 92% of people who are sharing this kind of content, and only 6% is actually made by a healthcare professional. So I think, again, that lens just makes it very interesting. And it's also, again, a reminder to take things with a pinch of salt. Someone is sharing their experience and where they come from. But that also needs you to do your own kind of maybe medical research, or it needs its own informed background. You can't just take that story or that situation and kind of place it in your own life. So, yeah, I think that venting style of content can also be a good thing to hear for someone who is going through something. But I think it also makes it difficult for the person that has maybe used the platform. If maybe you're known for something else and then that's situational and then you discuss that, I think it puts a level of performance pressure kind of on you also, because one thing about people, like, we love other people's business, and like people like other people in distress. Like, I watch a good crime docu just as much as the next person. So like, I think those kinds of thoughts and things are there, and that's what you have to remember. So I think that if you are sharing, it's very important to kind of lead with intention, and be like, do I just need a vent, or do I really hope that this reaches one person, if only, that it will benefit? And then also just being able to cement your feet in real life. So I always say that if you're going to share something online, number one, it shouldn't be something that you wouldn't invite commentary on. The same way that you have the freedom to share that opinion or share your experience, other people have the freedom to leave both positive and negative comments on that, So you kind of need to be able to also take the flack. But like I said, it's also in real life, whether it's with the people that maybe you live with, or like, your friend who's on speed dial, I think it's also important to be like accountable to them or have them informed on what's going on. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where it's only social media that you've shared this, but then in real life you haven't really shared it, because should you, like, I don't know, go viral or receive negative comments or whatever, you should be able to kind of like turn off your phone and know that I've spoken to my friend about this, and then my friends advised me to maybe see a therapist, or, like, you need to know that your sources and your community and your people are aware of your situation, because those are the people that matter. There was a phrase going around TikTok that was like, we weren't even supposed to know what like we look like, let alone like control our level of self-perception online. We were not even supposed to know what like other people on other continents look like. So now imagine like you sitting in your bedroom and you invite the opinions of 1 billion people. I think it's like the amount of users on TikTok, and it's like you invite the opinions of 1 billion people that you don't know, or like maybe shouldn't know. I think it's the opinions that are closest to you and the ones that exist in your real life. Those are the ones that matter. So that's kind of my perspective of it. I think it's just a very nuanced thing. And I'm grateful for the people that do share, because again, even for me, like, I always see people like, I'm not an internet crier. Don't think I ever will be. But sometimes I'm grateful for the level of vulnerability that those people show, if it's like crying in your car, whatever. There's so many days in my life that I've started where like I cry in the car, and then by the time I get to the destination, there's not a single person who even knows that happened, So I think it does really speak to like, again, the level of vulnerability, or like we're all just, in the human race, we all are going through the same thing. So that's what I do appreciate about it. But again, I think it's a very double-edged sword.
Yeah, that's very well put. I think there's something I've spoke on and it offended some people. And I thought exactly as you say, like, if I'm your friend and I see you venting on social media, but I've never heard you say it, then it's like, well, what are you doing, man? How come you didn't trust me to tell me that, but you trusted people online? And then when you share that kind of stuff and you get the negative comments, then what happens? You don't get received in a way that you thought you would, then that might lead you down a very dark path. So I think people need to be careful with sharing online. And again, you're inviting a world of strangers into your problems that you could potentially just solve by talking to your parents even. So I think there's that element as well. The validation, if I'm hurt, I want people to come around me and, say, KG, I'm sorry, this is looking bad for you, man, all of that. But man, I wouldn't want that. I think then that becomes your identity on social media, right? That KG is gonna come and cry about this and that. He's gonna tell us about being vulnerable and all of these things. And then I grow out of that. Then what happens? Then I leave people hanging on to my words here and they want to follow everything that I've been doing. Well, I'm healed. So again, the part of me then, well, where do I go for healing? Do I share that? My practices, my rituals. Do I share what rituals I do? Chances are I don't. A lot of people don't. A lot of people just vent on social media. So I think that part of, well, what do I do with all of these issues is what's missing, right? Because we just vent, we just talk, and people hang on to everything. And it's unfortunate. But what I would say, though, is that for anyone who, like we said, if you have a platform, if you have people who are leaning on you for some kind of direction, you have to practice a lot more, I guess, sensitivity around the stuff that you share. The idea of putting out stats without really understanding what these stats are saying, right? Without really appreciating the stats and speaking to a professional sometimes would help a lot more than me trying to break things down. Because we have a lot of these videos of breaking down, this psychologist was talking about this, but this is my take on it. I mean, you're not qualified for that. So why don't you just let them or share the clip with the person and let them, work with that or get in touch with those people. I think that for me is something that's way more beneficial than just putting out content for the sake of following, for the sake of monetizing my platform, for the sake of being the go-to person, the know-it-all for people. That has its place, that we have people who can easily find all kinds of research and put it online, right? Hey, that helps some people. But do you actually get to the center of what these people are dealing with is one of the problems that I think social media has created. Yeah.
100%. I think also just to speak to what you were saying about healing and how you might have moved past something, but maybe, your audience hasn't. I also think that there's another side of it where it's like also like healing isn't linear. So it's never like you just get like more and more cured of your mental illness as your life goes, like you don't get further away from it. It ebbs and it flows. So it's also like you might be put in a situation where you discuss an issue and then you heal, but then you fall down again because that's often what happens. And then now people are like, oh, well, there she goes again, or like she can't even get through. So that's also really difficult. Like I said, you put a level of like performance pressure on yourself, And I think that with all the things that you have to do in healing, I don't think that that's necessarily another burden that's so easy to take on.
Yeah, social media is so tricky right now. I think everyone is like on high alert. Everyone also understands that people are dealing with mental health issues, yet you'll find the same people the next day overly criticizing someone and something. So it's such a, the space that we're in is very interesting, but I think it is always important to be super mindful of what you share to the best of your ability, because even with what we do, you could have the best intention to share something and then someone could find something wrong with it. But I think the moment you put yourself out there, you have to make peace with the fact that you are opening yourself up to different opinions and perspectives. And I guess it's maybe tough to say you need tough skin, but it comes with the territory as well. But yeah, social media is very interesting right now.
I'm tempted to just add, we spoke about this on a session last week about these words. We said words like anxiety, narcissism. Narcissism right now is like, these men are narcissists, relationship, gaslighting, all of that. And people are using these and we're just clinging on to these words. We don't know what they mean. Right. And then I explained to someone what I recently went through in a separate incident, right? And they say, "Oh man, you were gaslit in that." Like, oh really? I never even thought of it that way. So again, me being a man, always seeing gaslighting from a feminine perspective, I never saw it as like, oh, men can be gaslit too. Or never understand, or no, women can be a narcissist as well. So those elements that again get lost on social media is we don't get to the understanding, because most people who speak about narcissists are women who talk about men. But so there is that the element of being sure that, okay, I'm doing my own work, my own research and understanding of things, and there's an element of being responsible and sometimes asking. You don't have to be triggered, which is another word, right? It's not about triggered all the time. Sometimes it's just a matter of, man, I see you're very passionate about what you're saying, but what do you actually mean? And that could set us into a different conversation, right? So yeah, take everything with a pinch of salt. Don't be rude. Be kind, and also understand that people are going through things just as much as that I am. Yeah.
Absolutely. And even as you said, like your literacy rates are dropping, people aren't reading, they're using ChatGPT as therapists. Like it's getting really, really, really scary. But I do think, again, as an adult in the world, you have responsibilities. And I think one of them is having like a multi-dimensional perspective on anything. So maybe a person didn't understand a word, they could ask you, but then maybe also go home and be like, okay, he said it's this, but online says it's this psychologist says it's this, and find your own understanding in that. And then also just to speak to the ChatGPT thing, it's come up for me so much in the past week. It's like every other person that I like speak to will be like, oh yeah, like I just asked ChatGPT this and I just asked ChatGPT this. And it's like, aside from like your data privacy, that's a whole other conversation. It's just like, I think people are looking for more and more ways to self-manage their stresses. It reminds me of like when Google was first a popular search engine, and like WebMD came out, and then you'd be like, I have a cough, and you'd be like, oh, I have a brain tumor. It's like very much that kind of thing. So I think don't be so quick to rely on the internet or robots for those kind of like interpersonal diagnoses. Like that's way too technical and way too emotional, I think, for sometimes as humans for us to even understand. So yeah, everyone needs to take responsibility and make sure that you're well informed.
I think that we've had a broad discussion on what resources exist for young Black youth when it comes to mental health. But a very important part that we've kind of left out of the conversation is, what is government's role? I think if we look at the mental health crisis from the statistics that Felicity was reading out earlier, it is a crisis, and young people are increasingly experiencing more severe mental health symptoms. So what role can our government and health systems play to better respond to this mental health crisis? I'm going to throw this to Tiffany and then to KG.
So for me, I think better support and funding. I mean, we were having this conversation earlier before, but I think in the space that we are in, as wellness practitioners with the businesses that we are starting, it really is to serve the community. And I won't sit and say that they aren't organizations within the government that are available to assist with, empowering us more so that we can reach the, broader and wider communities. But I think it's making that point a bit more accessible across the board, making that accessible, less hurdles to get to that point, because I think from my experience where it comes to, funding for my business so that I'm able to expand and reach different communities and stuff, it feels like such a hurdle to get through that. You can have every single document that you need, but here you are trying to do good. And of course, nothing is ever meant to be handed to you, understandably so. But you will find that, if someone else wants a tender, for example, it's easily granted for them. But then within our space, I do find that there is, I don't want to say fluff is the wrong word, but I think people do not take it as seriously. The government may have the statistics in front of them, but what are the big actionable changes that they are implementing and doing and providing for organizations and individuals, your schools and stuff, to make sure that it is accessible and easy? Mental health is such a massive thing right now that people are facing, from the youth all the way to, adults, and it's not even an age thing. So I think the prioritization of that, and I think when people also hear around like wellness things, I don't know why what is it? The automatic assumption is that it should be free. Our services should be free. And it's like, how do you think we're going to keep the lights on? As you put down your head, unimpressed, you're like, they think everything should be free. And you're like, hey, so I think the government prioritizing and empowering organizations even more, I think that also kind of takes a lot of pressure off of them, because we are passionate about doing the work. And I think in turn that also serves the community in such a massive way. So I think government's role for me, and how I'm looking at it currently from where I'm sitting, is just that better accessibility, and empowerment for organizations and businesses like ours, so that we can cast our net wider, because we're willing and able to do the work and we have the vision to do that. Whereas maybe they have a lot, they're running a whole country, we get it. So we're here for the work that we really do feel called to do.
Yes, 100%. And it doesn't exist without support.
It really doesn't.
Right.
It really doesn't.
And yeah, I think that wellness is often looked down upon, and mental health, just the fact that it's not integrated into our primary healthcare facilities on a clinic level, in rural communities, those interventions are not there. And so a situation worsens. And unfortunately, civil society can only do so much. And so that support is really needed and is necessary. And to sustain that growth and that development in the sector, civil society can't be the only actors. It's a partnership. And I think everybody has a role to play, for sure. KG, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think the funding issue is one of probably anyone who's in the space would say the same, and this idea that you have to have all of these other papers and all of these things, but you already have a practice that's there, it's running, you're ready to do work. But unfortunately, there's just those hurdles that Tiffany spoke of. So I think there's a part where government also needs to kind of wake up to the newer interventions that are coming up. I think we are at a very special time now. We're seeing a lot of people, also younger people, coming up with different ways of speaking about mental health, even intervention spaces, right? I mean, I would have never thought I'd find a Black person in Joburg, doing sound baths, for example, right? So for government to also start experimenting with that, not just having conferences in like some hotel. That's one aspect of it. But then there's spaces like this, smaller spaces, right? In communities, for example. How are they thinking about those things? Because if I'm a player on the ground, I received a message from someone today who actually said they want me to help them put together their own organization, right? And here I am still like, hey, I'm still waiting for funding. I'm looking for people to come and help me build my thing. Yeah. But then people are seeing and they want to do this work, but they can see that, man, we don't even know how to get involved. So you see that even access is very much limited, right? And there are organizations that I would say who have monopolized the space as well, because we are connected, we've been in the space, we know someone who works at social development, they can easily get things through us quickly, or for us quickly, right? So we have to then also deal with that, the corruption aspect of it, the tendering aspect of it. I've got a brother there, I've got an aunt there, and hey, man, we don't, right? We're doing work from the passion in our hearts and our souls, from our own funding, our own monies, from our family's monies. So then I look at government as some people who also need to look at employ younger people who then actually deal with these issues, employ people from communities that we don't often look into. I'm from Kgaugelo. I don't know one shack, one bench, one chair where people can actually say that, hey, I'm dealing with a mental health issue. Can I come here, right? even when I took my brother, for example, for counseling because he was living on the streets and dealing with addiction, right? They helped him, and I went back to the organization to say, hey, I want to spotlight what you guys do. Can you do some interviews, whatever, so that people in the community know? Even then, you still have to go through the red tape of asking this manager, that manager. So now, if you can't even share information, then how do you even get funding? So there's an interplay between us, government, and us practitioners, that we are always going to government and saying, hey, look at us. Our stuff is everywhere. But where are you guys meeting us then? Are you meeting us halfway? You have ways that you want us to help and fix. You have suggestions, guidelines. But are those all actually speaking to the needs of the community as well? Because we are also picking up things that I believe that sometimes in government are not being spoken of. So there's that element as well. Yeah.
And Mbali, just to speak to your practice, Mindful, which just turned 5, if I'm not mistaken, recently. But you've been able to create, I think, a whole bunch of different spaces, specifically that hold young Black people in meaningful ways. What have you learned about building spaces that actually hold people and not just host them?
I think that's definitely been a journey over time. We started from, at the beginning of COVID is actually when we launched. We had 3 weeks of existing before lockdown happened. So we turned very quickly into an online resource, and predominantly our offerings have been online. And it's very difficult to create a safe space online because you don't control space online. So it's been quite a journey in trying to mold that and to learn how to hold space for people, because me saying it's a safe space doesn't make the space safe, and a lot of people say that, say the safe space, but what does that actually mean in a practical terms? And I think I had to think about it as a leader. What did I mean when I said that? And what did I want to come across in a space that makes people feel like they can trust the space? And for me, it's been about creating that interpersonal bond, creating a space where vulnerability is offered and shared. Because a lot of the time we create these spaces as practitioners or founders where we want people to come engage the space, but what have you offered into the space that creates that baseline, that creates that level of connection? Because I can't just come here and expect people to share freely with me when I've offered nothing in that regard. It's all good and well for me to host the space, but I feel like that personal lens was very important in formulating what Mindful is as an organization and what you can expect from that. I think I've really tried in all of our offerings to lead by example, or lead with my vulnerability first, to say, hey, I am this person with this platform, but I'm nowhere near to having anything figured out. I struggle on a daily basis. These are my vulnerabilities. These are the things I do wrong. We all have toxic mental health habits that we do. And I think humanizing yourself and creating a space of openness was really important. We moved into more of a physical space, which has been over the past year when we started doing more programming in person, I think it's been important to not anticipate needs. I think we see it all the time in wellness, mental health, is that you go into a community and you're like, these people are struggling with drug addiction, and that you have not spent a minute talking to anybody in that community, trying to understand what is their immediate need, because maybe we see something from an outsider's perspective, but on the ground, you'll actually realize that the immediate need is actually a skills workshop so that they can make an income, but you're just seeing the drug problem. The drug problem is a subsidiary of another problem. So I think that research has been very important, and co-creating. I think in any space where you're wanting to make an impact, it's important to involve the community that you're helping in their own solutions. Because why would I adopt a solution that was given to me but not something that I had a say in? So it's all good and well for me to say, oh, you should run 5 times a day and that's going to be so great for you. But I don't know what the reality is. It's not safe to run. There's no space for me to run. I can't run at night, but that's the only time that have free, But when you co-create a solution that is practical and relevant to the context, you see people adopting that and owning it. That's actually something that they are proud of, and it's something that they want to take into their life because it's personal and it's theirs. And I think that that's what it's been about, creating spaces, be as involved in the creation process and in the support and the after effect. It's like you have to be aligned with the people, and you have to support them in creating the solutions that are relevant to them, and not something that you no one size fits all has kept on coming up today, but it's so important, I think, in this work to tailor make solutions for specific organizations, specific communities as a whole. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a space that's needed, especially amongst the youth. So thank you for the work that you do, all of you, actually. But yeah, as we bring our conversation to a close, let's take some time to ideate and kind of pose a bit more of a fun question. If you could dream up a healing space that's just for Black youth in Joburg, what would it look like? What's in the room? And maybe more importantly, what's not in the room? But this is a question for everyone, so take your time.
I mean, I can start.
It's an easy one for you.
I think it's an easy one for me because, we recently you guys are in the space. And I thank God for that. I thank my ancestors, the universe. But this really has been a dream brought to life. The business has been around for 3 years, and celebrating our 3rd birthday with opening up the studio has really just cemented for me, just how much the community poured into this vision for it to even exist. So just with the studio on its own, I really do want it to serve, and it is serving as a community hub, for people to gather and tailor and pick, their own wellness rituals, practices. And again, we keep going back to the not one size fits all, but I think that is so important to create a space where people seeking different types of practices and modalities can come into a space that holds them, even if you just want to come and lay down and work and just disconnect. I really do feel like Nuru Studio does offer that space for you to come and just be zen, really relax and take your mind off of stuff. So I think it was slightly an easier one for me to answer, which I'm grateful for. And one thing that I always invite people is just come curious, and then what do you leave behind is expectation. Really just come through curious and then leave the expectation behind, and let the space and whatever it is we're here to experience flow through you. Truly. Yeah.
So I mean, I usually record my podcast on a golf course, very much in Greenland, So I think being out in nature does something for men, for the boys that I work with, right? Because a lot of us are caught up in the race, the chase to be something, someone, which is, and I don't say that to talk down on it. I think it's a very important thing. But in your chase, there's always a need to disconnect and get away from the norm and the everyday. And I think for men it's very important, because then we ground ourselves out there. So I think being in nature, being in a place where you can do stuff with your hands, being very grounded and in touch with the earth, I think that will do something for us, something very different for us, that we really don't get. I mean, I'll speak on something very stupid right now, but my friends, we laugh at each other. Like, I've never seen your feet, man. That is. So do you understand? Like, how often do you actually take off your shoes and just walk in nature? DJ Sue did that, and everyone laughed at him, because I guess the timing of it was very random. But those are things that are very practical. They don't cost you much. And if I can create a space where men could come in, take off their shoes, be in a place where they can work, they can talk, they can have fun, they can engage with different tools, things that are not there in your office, right? Not a PC, not just make something, man, that you can take home. Is it sewing? Is it cooking? Is it, building some little motor car, whatever you're doing? But let it be done with intention, and let it put you in touch with your gift, with your essence, whatever that is. And maybe it might come out there if you don't know it yet. But again, it's a space that invites men to be more curious and try things, as opposed to, no, that's not for me, I don't want to do that. I want you to come into a space where maybe nothing is for you, and experiment a little bit. Maybe you'll find something in there. Yeah.
That is true. I think that connecting with nature is so underrated, and definitely something we have to integrate a bit more. I think for me, the loneliness pandemic is just a big thing at the forefront of my mind all the time, because once you get to a certain age, there's not really a lot of spaces where you can go to connect with people outside of a professional space or outside of maybe an exercise space. So for me, a community hub where maybe the focus isn't speaking about like it's not psychoeducation, or it's nothing on the heavier side, and it's just a space where people can connect on the daily things, on what's important to you right now, what are you struggling right now. I think young people especially need spaces that are healthier to connect in. There's a lot of like expectation around spaces and around how people should show up in spaces. So I think a space that has no expectations is come as you are, and understand, like when they say what's not in the room, all that's not in the room is judgment and discrimination and hatred, and you just allow people to show up in the way that they are, and connect on a real level about something that's actually meaningful to you, something that's going on in your life. I think if Mindful ever had a studio, as much as it would have the educational space and the psychosocial support space, there would be a space that's purely for connection, just for people to know that there's a community that they can go to. If you don't have community, there is people there, and there are people who are wanting to meet you and wanting to connect with you and support you on the journey. We all need people to walk with through life, and sometimes it's harder to find those people than you think. So for me, that's what the ideal space would look like.
I think for me, mine's also kind of different. I think I've always been like a person who also loves community so much and fostering community. So in my own time, creating like safe spaces has been so much of creating safety in those that are around me. So creating really meaningful friendships where like your values align, or where you do kind of feel safe. And I think maybe growing up as a youth in Joburg, it's definitely been a kind of a survival skill that I've learned, where I always say to my friends, like, there's no vibe that we're going to go find anywhere in the city. Like, we are the vibe. If we go somewhere and it's not fun, maybe our conversation sucks. You can't always put that expectation onto the outward world. So for me, my space is kind of, I would say, maybe comes from more of the inside, where it's always like I just try to make sure that the community around me, I feel safe around, so that if I am at a party but I'm with a friend, I'm safe enough to, if I'm not feeling it, I can tell them, and then that's fine. Or I still have space to be vulnerable regardless of how the environment changes. So that's kind of how, I would see more of a healing space is those that are around you.
Yeah. Well, we love these ideas, and we hope that we see them come to fruition soon. For now, we'll be using Nuru Studios, but one day we will each create these spaces. And I think, like Felicity is saying, is you can create them in your own life and in your own environment. It doesn't have to be a physical space. We take up space and we exist in space. So you can still create a feeling or a vibe, and create a certain type of energy in the rooms that you fill. As we draw to a close, we just want to highlight one thing, and that's the fact that the conversation doesn't end here. As much as the conversation has been around what are people struggling with, and what are the ills that exist, we also always want to push towards a better future. And I think that's why we're having these conversations, so that we can identify the problems and ideate collectively towards solutions. And we just want to pose the idea to our audience that as much as there is personal mental health growth to do, and there's an ongoing personal journey, there's also lots of areas for engagement in terms of the world we live in and structuring better mental health outcomes for our society as a whole. Something that not a lot of us know about is that, there's town halls, there's conversations happening in government where they're asking all of us to engage in conversations around bettering our society. So we encourage you to be proactive in looking out for different opportunities for advocacy. I know we oftentimes think that, you're not the person with the idea, or you're not the person with the right platform to, action probable change. But I think that it's important for us to all know that each person's contribution is valid, and it's important to integrate yourself into the solution thinking. As much as you want the change, you have to be a part of it and to take it on as a personal struggle, I think. And there's also other things. I think we as people in the space have to push for the inclusion of mental health and mental health solutions into the upcoming NHI. It needs to be covered by insurance. We all know that. It's a costly thing. But if we're not speaking to it and we're not advocating for it, then there's not really a lot of opportunities. And I think when we come from more of a medical perspective, we understand that the big problem that we're facing is a lack of resources or a gap in healthcare providers. So what we're all doing is upskilling ourselves or upskilling others to offer mental health interventions. And I think that that's something that we can encourage our communities to do as well. If you know somebody who is maybe a psychiatric nurse, if you know somebody who is in the mental wellness field, encourage them to share that skill, share those skills in the community, share those skills with as many people as you know, because there's a lack of resources and we always want to try in our little way contribute to the journey a bit further. So we want to leave you with that and just empower you to know that you are a part of the change, and it's starting as big or as little as you want to, and taking it from there. But as we close, we just want to thank you so much for a fruitful discussion. I think Felicity and I have never had a short discussion in our lives. We always want to get as much as we can out of the guests that we have. And I think that it's been so beautiful to have your insights, because it's so nice to look at it from a holistic perspective and not one size fits all, just one more time. So as we close, we just want to ask you to please share where we can find you, where can our followers connect with you, and also if there's any resources that you'd like to share, link to a platform, anything that you'd like to share in closing, please do.
Okay, so with us, Nuru House, you can find us on our website, which is www.nuruhouse.co.za, and then also on Instagram, Nuru NURU_house. And just from those two platforms alone, you will definitely find our weekly programs and schedules that we offer in the space, in the studio space. We do a lot of collaborations, and we also have the studio open for hire, for sessions where people are open to doing workshops, corporate events, all of that stuff. So there's a lot of information around that. And also just on our own platform, we really do try create informative content, light and more informative stuff that's a bit heavier where we introspect. But we really do try utilize the platforms that we have for that. So you can find us on there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So for me, you can find me on Manned Up Conversations. So www, it's a bit lengthy. So MANNEDUPCONVOS.com. So that's Manned Up Convos. And you can search us on social media on Instagram. I think it is manned_up_convos. And on Facebook as well, Manned Up Conversations. On TikTok as well, Manned Up Convos. I think, manned_convos. And basically, man, if you go on Manned Up Conversations, every second Wednesday of the month, you'll find a new podcast. And that speaks to different conversations. So I think we have something coming out tomorrow where we're speaking around trauma and ecstasy. So how someone basically used unconventional drugs to work with their trauma. So it's very, can I call them risky conversations at times, very brave and courageous conversations. But again, it's opening up the space and saying that there's more than one way, as you say, no one size fits all. And we also host a boys' conversation session. We call it a Majita Mondays. So in Hatfield, there's a student accommodation called the Varsity Studios. So I've partnered with them. And we're basically going through a program. It's a 6-month program, and getting the guys to basically learn about themselves, identity-wise, consent, which was a conversation we had yesterday. Mujita, like what is a guy? What is a guy about? What does friendship look like? How do they support each other? So I also have those interventions that I run. I have a WhatsApp group that if you want to join, if you go on the website, there's a link to that. We have about close to 100 guys now. And, it's not a very active group because men don't want to talk a lot. However, there's podcasts that we share on there, articles, stuff you can read. And the interesting thing also on the podcast is I've now expanded outside of SA. I am looking for people in other African countries. However, it's a bit difficult to get that, but I'm getting men in the States, for example, who have taken an interest. So there's that element, right? So a lot of international resources that are being shared. So man, if you want to start your own interventions, you can go on Manned Up on the website. You'll find on the episodes as you listen, there are resources that we put there. You can get in touch with the guest yourself. You can reach out to them for help or wanting to explore more, learn from them, do what they do. They can support you. So that's where we're at.
Awesome. Thank you. And to follow Mindful Organization, it's Mindful Organization on Instagram, Mindful Org on TikTok. But I just go to the Instagram and then get everything from there. But yeah, we offer psychoeducation, so understanding of different mental health experiences. We also look a lot at different intersections and different youth experiences and how that impacts your mental health. So a lot of brave conversations as well. We also are moving into a season of eventing this May and June, so please get involved. There's a lot of in-person events coming up. Also a collaboration with the Nuru House at the end of this month. So a lot is happening, so please follow along on our journey. But for now, that is going to be all from us. Please like, follow, and subscribe to the Black Health Podcast and follow us on all social media. Thank you again for watching. Goodbye.